Now then, you're very welcome back. So Wimbledon 2023 is upon us. It is that time of year. Novak Djokovic, fresh from winning at Roland Garros and in Australia as well, has a calendar Grand Slam season in his sights. He is going for a 5th Wimbledon title in a row. It would be his 8th in total, which would move level with Roger Federer. And Djokovic has not been beaten at Wimbledon since 2016. It would also move him to 24 Grand Slams total, and therefore level with Margaret Court. In the women's game, the elder stateswoman is very much 43-year-old Venus Williams, beaten today. There are a trio of contenders. Defending champion is Elena Rybankina. We have Polish top seed Iga Świątek, and second seed Aryna Sabalenka is back after the ban on Russian and Belarusian athletes last year. So very happy to say Caitlin Thompson of Racquet Magazine is with us. Good evening. Hello.
Hi there. How's it going?
Great. I presume you've been to Wimbledon, have you?
I have. This is the first year I haven't gone in quite a while. Obviously not counting the year that they did not put it on. But yeah, usually I'm in London this time of year. This time I emphasized going to Paris ahead of London. And I have to say I have major FOMO right now.
Yes, strawberries and cream at home, glass of Pimm's just to feel like you're there. I have never had the pleasure of Wimbledon. I was lucky enough in 2012 during the Olympics to go there. And I have to say, I remember thinking, and it's terrible how time flies, I thought within the next 11 years I would get back for Wimbledon. But I do remember thinking, God, this really is as lovely and atmospheric as I kind of hoped it would be. It lives up to expectation, I would think it's fair to say.
Undoubtedly. Whether you are a grass court aficionado, whether you love the British sporting scene, which not everybody does, it's sort of hard not to be reverential, at the very least, about just the environs. The place itself is just so magnificent and beautiful. And, you know, the special things about the tournament, the sort of hushed crowd experience, obviously the uniforms that are mandatory for the all-white outfits on the players, with very little other colors or logos, really do enhance the experience that you're watching something very sort of profound. Again, I have love for all of the slams. The French typically is my favorite, but hard not to love Wimbledon and exactly what it represents. Grass is my favorite surface to play on, so it's really fun to see some of the results that are a little more unanticipated when you get on a surface like this that most players don't have a lot of experience on.
I mean, that is the funny thing for the most iconic venue, is none of these players are growing up on grass in the main.
No, absolutely not. And the season is super short. So if anything, went from being the surface where 3 out of the 4 majors were contended on grass back in the day. The US Open at Forest Hills was on grass. Kooyong in Australia hosted the Australian Open. This is after the Australian Open became a real major, which is why, you know, Margaret Court's record of 24 slams is very dubious, because she won most of those at the Australian Open before it was really considered an actual major tournament. But that was in fact on grass. And now it's gone from being 3/4 of the season to simply, you know, a very, very truncated quarter, less than 25%, certainly in terms of total tournaments. They don't have a Masters 1000 level at that surface. And, you know, as you said, very few people grow up even getting a chance to set foot on it, much less making it their favorite surface. So it makes for some interesting results and some interesting, you know, tactics to see who brings their best tennis to this tournament.
So Caitlin, Court's record brings us nicely to Djokovic, and he's in that sweet spot that happens late in any big career where any win is another major milestone. And he's won 6 of his last 8 majors at 36 years of age. I think it's fair to say he's won the war against Nadal and Federer in terms of Grand Slam numbers, realistically. I was reading, he's very much at this stage cut back on his schedule at tour level in recent years. He is Grand Slam focused, and the man to beat is the headline. To what extent? What is the gap here? Because we all had high hopes for Carlos Alcaraz at the French, and he's won the warm-up tournament at Queen's, Alcaraz. But he seemed to say the occasion got to him a touch against Djokovic in the semi-final.
It was insane going into that match that Alcaraz was the favorite. Obviously, he had a meteoric rise lifting the trophy last year in New York as the US Open champion. But anybody who favored Alcaraz, even on his preferred surface of clay against Djokovic, somebody who at the time had 22 majors, is sort of insane. I have to hope that if the two of them clash again in this tournament, even though the surface obviously favors Djokovic given his track record and past performance, but I have to hope that at least some of that experience earlier this spring in Paris would have benefited Alcaraz, because not only did Alcaraz not quite play up to his potential, he also was just racked with nerves, cramping, which is what happened with him, where he kind of lost his legs there towards the end of the match, is something that often happens when nerves get the better of you and you're using up a lot of energy because of sort of stress and anxiety. So I have to hope at the very least we'll get a better performance out of him. But despite the fact that Alcaraz comes in as the number one seed, anybody saying that Novak Djokovic is not the favorite to win this and get one step closer to the calendar year slam, which, obviously he's hurtling towards after really great performances in Melbourne and Paris, is just taking crazy pills. They're trying to sell you something, because the truth is Djokovic is far and away the favorite. That's not to say he's a lock. This is a tricky surface and, anything can happen. But Alcaraz, I wouldn't say if Djokovic is going to lose, it's going to be because of Alcaraz.
Okay. Who is most likely waiting in the wings then?
I mean, if they can get to it, I like a Medvedev matchup quite a bit. Obviously, Medvedev was out of the tournament last year because of the ban on Russian and Belarusian athletes, which I have a lot of opinions about. But what it really denied us was a great matchup between the two of them. Medvedev famously stopping Djokovic the last time he went for the calendar slam, very, very close to getting it in New York at the US Open, and Medvedev shut him down in straight sets. Medvedev is one of the few players who not only has the weaponry, but the variety and the sort of off-kilter chaos game that can throw Djokovic off his patterns and his sort of reliable ground strokes. Anybody who's trying to go up against Novak Djokovic in a war of attrition will lose. That's the battle that Novak Djokovic loves all day. For somebody like Medvedev, who's got a little bit more of a unglamorous but extremely tricky game. He's one of the few players in the draw that has bested Novak in the later stages of these Grand Slam tournaments, but also just his game style. Another one where he playing would be Nick Kyrgios. Nick Kyrgios pulled out at the very last minute, late last night, London time, with an injury. But Kyrgios, I think for a lot of people, was somebody who could have beaten Djokovic on grass, given his, sort of first strike tennis. There's a couple others, but really for me, outside of Sinner, maybe Alcaraz, would love to see Tiafoe do really well, given his sort of ability to play up. There's always a chance on grass that it's some, crazy run by a grass court specialist, as it were. But really, I think Medvedev is the only one who can kind of credibly take on Novak at his peak. But even I don't like that matchup. It is hard to imagine anybody walking out of London Southwest 19 with the trophy other than the Serbian star.
Okay. To turn to the women's draw, which is far more open, I mentioned Venus Williams there at 43, who is the elder stateswoman of women's tennis at the moment. So she was beaten on centre court today in straight sets by Svitolina. I'm kind of curious what insight you have into where Venus is in her life, because I would think if I had her career and I was 43, being beaten by younger players, I would find it just infuriating, and I would tell myself, my God, if I'd played you at 23, not 43, you wouldn't even be fit to lace my shoes. So she's still out there, she's still doing it. Is this towards the end of the spectrum where we can say, well, Venus just has a wonderfully healthy love of tennis and love of playing the sport, and why wouldn't you keep playing? It's life is for living. Or is this more of a obsessive, if I haven't got tennis, what else have I got in my life? I can't quit, or I'm doomed. What's your sense of her relationship with the sport at 43 to be still out there?
It's a very good question, and I think much has been read into Venus Williams, because I think you are among a wide array of watchers who have sort of concluded the same thing, which is, I've had a stellar career. I've made all the money I could possibly spend in one lifetime. My name is going to be in the record books, regardless of what happens next. Why not just retire and kick my feet up and, take it easy? I was really moved by an interview Venus gave to Racquet Magazine's podcast host Renee Stubbs last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago, on the Racquet Magazine podcast. And basically she said, listen, I'm a pragmatist. I still can play. I love to play. I'm going to get wild cards. It's really what I love to do. I love the pension. I love the healthcare. I love the fact that the WTA sort of takes care of the logical and pragmatic needs for her life. And you might think, well, how good could the insurance that the WTA is providing somebody like Venus Williams actually be enough to keep her on the tour? And the truth is, she's somebody who I think is thinking about it in X's and O's. She's a very pragmatic thinker. She's very straightforward, and she's not thinking so much about legacy and ego. I think she's thinking, this is something I still enjoy. And you know what? Crowds are still gathering to watch her play. If you looked at any of the social media in the run up to her match against Alina Svitolina, this was weighted with eager anticipation, and, they put them on center court. So I think for me, it's not what I would choose to do, but I also have never won a Grand Slam and have, never been as good at anything as Venus Williams is at tennis. So for me, the only thing that sort of bothers me about it at this point is you get, like the McEnroe brothers commentating on American TV saying like, oh, well, this is probably your last Wimbledon. It's like, you know what? Venus Williams is going to tell you when she's ready to have her last Wimbledon. And as long as she still gets wild cards into tournaments and people still line up to watch her play, that's her choice to make. Now, will I say that this is the best, most amazing tennis that she's playing? No, undoubtedly not. And for me, that would be enough to sort of keep me off the court. But again, Venus Williams is better than any of us have been at anything. So I think she kind of gets to decide. Yeah.
The women's draw has been talked about as like a trio of contenders. We have our defending champion, Elena Rybakina. There are fitness concerns. We have Polish top seed Iga Świątek. I was rehearsing the pronunciation there for 5 minutes before we spoke. Thank you. And second seed Aryna Sabalenka, who was back after the ban on Russian and Belarusian opponents. Is that how you see it? Is it like that? Is that becoming a big three?
It's a good question. And I think absolutely yes, especially on a more neutral surface. On grass, I actually have to say that Iga, out of the three of them, is the least likely to win this thing. Iga Świątek, despite the fact that she has the most majors of that group, has the most well-suited, well-developed all-court game. She doesn't quite have the firepower of Rybakina or Sabalenka. And for that reason, she hasn't really done as well on grass as the other two, obviously by leaps and bounds. So this is not Iga Świątek's tournament to win. She certainly can win it. And what I love so much about the women's tour, especially right now, is that it gives us a hint about what the post-Big Three ATP is going to look like, which is a variety of playing styles, backgrounds, personalities, dispositions, country affiliations, all contending in a way that's actually sort of suspenseful. If anyone but Novak Djokovic wins on the men's side, it'll be a giant surprise. The women's field, as you said, is wide open. That's what I like. I like the fact that we don't know exactly who's going to be lifting the trophy in 2 weeks' time, that beautiful Venus Rosewater dish. So for me, this is really kind of down to whether Aryna Sabalenka will live up to her potential and win this thing. She certainly can. Rybakina, as you noted, has had a rough couple of weeks. She's obviously a great grass court player, winning the title last year against Ons Jabeur, but she's had some illness going on. It seems like she's not at full strength, so that obviously is not an ideal situation when you're walking into a Grand Slam tournament. And really, Iga doesn't have the game to win this thing, but I'm happy to be wrong if she sort of all of a sudden develops sea legs on that grass. It would be a surprise. She tends to like a slower surface. She doesn't hit anywhere near as hard as the other two. But as I said, she has the experience. She's got the absolute intense mental focus. And it'll be not a surprise if she loses, but certainly a big match when she does, assuming that happens. The other real question mark for me is Ons Jabeur. Like I mentioned, she was credibly contending in the final last year against Rybakina for about a set and a half. And then it kind of all fell apart. She's got an incredibly varied game. She hits a lot of chip and charge. She really plays the entire dimensionality of the court. And she's somebody who can neutralize the power of a Rybakina or a Sabalenka with her variety, more so than Iga can on this surface. But she's had a real question mark of a season. Obviously, she was injured for a little bit, and then she's had, I think less than stellar results. So the question for me will be less about who ultimately wins the trophy, but more how are these great sort of seismic talents kind of aligning, and who's going to bring their best tennis to this fortnight. Yeah,
it's quite interesting. I on the your liking of that openness of the women's draw as opposed to a dominant 1 or 2 or 3. I think it as the more casual tennis fan in this conversation by a distance, for me, I much prefer that star power. I much prefer coming to the men's draw and it's Djokovic, shot at history, and can Alcaraz do it? And that's a narrative, for want of a much better word, that straight away, like, I'm on board with. And I do take your point, though, on you liking that openness of the women's draw, because I would watch a lot of golf for my sins. And so like when it comes to a major, when Wyndham Clark wins the most recent one, I'm kind of okay with that because I was watching when he won the Wells Fargo several weeks ago and I have a sense of him. But I think the golf fans who just watch the majors are saying, Wyndham Clark? Please, dull. So that relationship with star power is kind of interesting.
It is, and it's a really good point. I mean, I would say for me, I don't discount your point about star power. I think for a lot of people, you know, the big four, which unfortunately doesn't really include Andy Murray, the fourth really is more Serena Williams, was the main vehicle for fandom, especially new fan engagement, adoption, and retention in the last 15 years or so. I think when you weight it so heavily towards the narrative and so far away from the tennis, what you're doing is actually discounting the actual tennis. I don't like a foregone conclusion. I don't like watching a dominant performance very often. Of course, sometimes it's great to watch somebody at the peak of their powers just commanding the space and transcending, you know, time and physical limitations. That's cool. It's cool to witness. It's not that exciting if the field just kind of fails to show up and one guy wins everything. We've seen what the big three, all of them, look like when they're in the ecstasy of victory. We've seen them, you know, be good sports. We've seen them be sort of very corporate and pat each other on the back and talk about greatness. It's all a little dull for me. It's been dull for quite a while. And I think the GOAT debate, while I respect it and I understand that there's something very simple that a lot of fans, especially new fans, like to grasp when they're talking about, well, they have the most, so they're the greatest. Well, maybe, but for me, it's how do these athletes make you feel? For me, watching Francesca Schiavone win the 2011 French Open as a journeywoman who was 31, I believe, at the time, nobody expected her to be there. She summoned her most courageous, amazing tennis and walked away with the trophy in Paris in a way that was unexpected, but also kind of the height of our sport. I'll take that any day of the week, not because it's somebody new, but because you're seeing somebody write history in their image. For me, Djokovic is expected to march forward. He might get to 30 slams by the end. Is he the greatest by Grand Slam count in singles? Sure. By overall match count in all titles and all events, mixed doubles, doubles, and singles, Martina Navratilova has everyone beat by a mile. Is it who's the coolest? I don't know. That's Borg, Arthur Ashe, Yannick Noah. Is it somebody who's the most stylish, the most elegant, the most icy cold? You know, this is all what makes sports really interesting. And I think if I'm not taking anything away from people who like to see history in a very binary way be made. On the other hand, there's a lot of different types of history. And I think we're going to look back on this big four era and think that was really a great star-powered time, but also the narratives got really simplistic. And tennis itself didn't do a good job of marketing its own sport because it had these, you know, very easy, I think, assets to deploy. And I think the sport became lazy because of it. Instead of saying, hey, listen, we have this incredible sport. Anybody can beat anybody on any given day. That's incredible. And let's focus on how great that is, and all these comers and all of this, you know, traveling circus going to the most glamorous places and beautiful courts and all across the globe. That's always been what the tennis that I watch, which is why I'd take a Yannick Noah winning or a Mary Pierce or a Marion Bartoli over somebody winning their 10th, 15th, 20th trophy in a row. It's just, I want the variety. It's
amazing listening to you because the parallels, there's obviously something in human nature that dictates all of this, because the parallels between a sport which anyone can win on any given day and then the reliance on superstardom. I mean, you're just, and then the vacuum afterwards, you're basically talking golf, Tiger Woods there as well. It's and right. Like around the same timeline. So, by the way, I presume the most stylish tennis player is Roger Federer, or who is Caitlin's choice there?
Of the greatest of the big three,
I'm talking elegance, by the way, not his regal clothes that he used to wear at Wimbledon.
I don't know. I think the most elegant is probably Stefan Edberg. I love the way that he chipped and charged. Maybe it's I don't know, the icy cold Chris Evert, who has, outside of Rafa Nadal, the best record on clay ever. Just a mind-boggling amount of just icy cold, complete dominance. Yeah, I mean, for me, if you only talk about the big three and you only sort of contextualize what one facet of our game, these aren't people playing doubles, they're not people playing mixed. In a lot of cases, they're not going out and being activists. You know, 50 years ago, Billie Jean King won women's singles, mixed doubles, women's doubles, and founded the WTA, creating a league for women to play competitive sports that has forever changed the the fate of women across the globe for half a century. That's the greatest. That's the greatest. That's the most elegant performance. That's the coolest thing that I can imagine. Not only because I think wheelchair tennis is cool and legends tennis is cool and junior tennis is cool and the mixed and doubles events are cool, but because it has to have some greater meaning. You know, what's one movement that Novak Djokovic created? Even Federer with his elegance and his, beautiful ground strokes. Are we going to remember anything off the court that he's done? I don't know.
True. You can make me sound very superficial now if I just say I like his backhand, so I'll move on. I want to get your sense of the politics here, because I think at a glance we know Wimbledon banned the Russian and Belarusian players last year, and I guess it's bubbling away because there are so many players from that part of the world on circuit. But I don't pay too much heed to it really until yesterday in the Sunday Times. I don't know if you've seen it, and maybe you'd seen her speak already, but for people who haven't, in the Sunday Times yesterday, Daria Kasatkina is the Russian number 1. She's around number 11 world ranking. She's won 6 WTA titles, and it was just the most brilliant interview. It started wherever they were talking to her with a Ukrainian fan came up to her, a Russian, and gave her a big hug and thanked her. So that was kind of an interesting start to the interview. And it turns out over the last year she had condemned the war, condemned Putin, and come out as gay. And so just one quote from her amongst many interesting quotes: "It's unsafe for me now to go home with the regime that we have. As a gay person who opposes the war, it's just not possible to go back. But I don't regret it, not even 1%. When the war started and everything turned to hell, I was overwhelmed and I decided, F it all. I couldn't hide anymore. I wanted to say my position on the war and my sexuality, which was tough coming from a country where being gay is not accepted. But it felt like I had a backpack of stones on my shoulders and I had to throw it off. Afterwards, I faced a few consequences, but the only thing that worried me was my parents, that they were fine, they're still in Russia, and that they are proud of me." And again, it's an amazing interview. Her parents sold their house when she was 12 to fund her tennis, by the way. No pressure kid, but she's made 9 million since, so she's doing okay. But she was saying, for instance, that any Ukrainian players out there, they're still not shaking her hand. One player sort of half gave her a thumbs up at Roland Garros. Looking in from afar, I thought, well, that's a bit harsh. She's condemned the war, maybe shake her hand. But it just gave me a good sense of how the lived experience for these players. I'm not really thinking too much about the politics, but that is really obviously bubbling away.
Completely right. And, if you were to ask me who's the most elegant player currently, it's Daria Kasatkina. Not only is her tennis game amazing, but activism, saying, what she said to the Sunday Mail, what she has said on our podcast, what she's talked about on her own YouTube series, to me is everything that you just said. It's an indication of this lived experience of these athletes sharing a locker room, sharing essentially a workplace. As far as I know, and I don't know, incredibly thoroughly, almost every single athlete who is from Russia or Belarus wants no part of this war. Most of them who have felt safe enough have condemned it. Nobody's condemned it as much as she has, because she's left and she's decided to be, I think, the most courageous version of a human being possible, which is incredible. But truly, I think whether you want to get into the politics of, was All England correct in banning these athletes, certainly I understand why they felt like they needed to take a stand. But on the other hand, the athletes in a lot of cases are not safe to speak out. If you look at what some of the Chinese athletes, when asked about the disappearance of Peng Shuai, what kind of position they would be in. If you look at other sort of industries and Chinese dissidents who have spoken out against the fascist regime at home, they've been disappeared or kidnapped or had their entire bank accounts frozen. So I don't think we can overstate how these athletes are grappling with something that is far greater than themselves. And some of them are prepared to be brave and make, an astounding statement like you just read. And some of them aren't prepared to do that for various reasons. But I haven't heard a single piece of evidence to suggest that anybody is pro-Putin or pro-war from the Russian or Belarusian camp. And again, I haven't thoroughly investigated this with the lens that some of my journalistic colleagues could or should be doing potentially. But I think, it speaks to the fact that this is a fraught time. Yeah. And it actually, to me, is one of the bonuses of tennis. Tennis touches every part of the globe, as does football, as do a few sports that get us from favelas to luxury high rises and everywhere in between. Tennis is a truly global sport, and it's the only one that has been more often on the right side of history than it hasn't. and that has paid women somewhat approximating what the men can earn. And for that reason, it has found itself caught in the crosshairs of a lot of really interesting political conversations. To me, that's a bonus. That's a plus. That's a feature, not a bug. And that's why tennis, to me, is so profound, because not only what these amazing athletes do on the court, but also just the occasion of what this traveling circus and all of the attendant stuff that goes with it gives us opportunities to discuss. And I'm really just honestly blown away by Daria Kasatkina specifically, because of how just absolutely brave she has been and continues to be. And so, all I can say is hats off, because that to me is, that's the greatest of all time has now been answered. And it's not about trophies. It's about what you're using your prominence to do.
26 years old. It's very impressive. We will touch base, I'm sure, over the next fortnight. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers. Caitlin Thompson of Racquet Magazine. Always great to have her on the show.